Well, hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Aviva Neff, and I'm here in conversation with Greg Geffrard, a Chicago-based intimacy consultant. Greg, thank you so much for joining us for this Advocacy Snapshot conversation.
Thank you so much for having me here this morning. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. So we're going to get started with a couple of questions for you and, just speak from the heart. We're also eager to learn about you and your practice. So just, take it away. So first and foremost, Greg, can you tell me a little bit about your practice as an intimacy consultant? Specifically, what about intimacy work lights your fire, artistically speaking?
Yes. So I'll start with the second question first. The
Perfect.
What led me to this work in particular? So I have a background in sexual assault prevention education, and it wasn't until I moved to Chicago in 2012 that I really became activated. I don't think I would go as far as to call myself an activist, simply because I know organizers and such. That I would say that those individuals have that title, and I don't feel like I live up to that title in the same way. But I'm somebody who is active and trying to work on like expanding my consciousness and understanding, and specifically working from a space of empathy. How do I make sure that I'm engaging folks while decentralizing myself in their own narratives, and how do I create space? And so that's something that I've always been really interested in. It's like, how do I cultivate space, especially as somebody who was raised by nothing but Black women, and like seeing that navigation for them in a world that at times refused to see them. The reason that this part is so crucial to this intimacy work is because ultimately the working definition that I utilize is the one that was created by Ann James, founder of Intimacy Choreographers of Coordinators of Color, and Bliss Griffin and Laura Reichard, Chelsea Pace, and contributions from Kaya Dunn. Is the definition is if any part of your intersecting identity is being leveraged in the story that is being told, then it is very likely that there will be moments of intimacy, simply because what we're asking for is the personal. It is that which is part of your intersecting identity. And we can think of like the federally protected identities, race, gender, religion, ability. When those things are being asked to be part of the storytelling, I think the focus shifts not away from safety, but primarily should shift to the idea of sustainability, because those identities are still with you when you are no longer part of the process. So just making sure that that which you have signed up for to work on for 2 months, you aren't having to process for the next 2 years. And so it is for me sustainability practices. I just one of my favorite actors is Don Cheadle, and it's just like the idea of I've never been somebody who's like aspired to have like a law, to have like famous and name on the marquee and everything, although I wouldn't mind the financials that come with that. But it is primarily, I've always wanted to have a long career. Like that's all. I just wanted to keep working, to be able to continue feeding my curiosity for investigating and navigating like the life of people. Um, uh, and to help to illuminate and better understand myself and those around me. And so the thing that lights me up, and then going into my practices, the thing that lights me up about this is these tools that are being utilized, these intimacy tools, even though the field is new, these tools are very old. And those who are the pioneers of this work, I think of, I think of Alina Horn, I think of a Sidney Poitier, I think of Harry Belafonte. I think of individuals who have had to find ways to navigate the spaces that they're working in, because in the words of Shonda Rhimes, they were living their first only different life. Like they're the ones being in a space that broke up the homogeny, but they were the only person there. And so how do you navigate in a space that's not potentially giving you that which you need in order to do your best work? In other words, in order for you to bring your full self into the room. And this part's the easy part. And so the five primary things in which I focus on, and I think they can be applied in different ways depending on what institutions I'm working in. I utilize the five best practices by Theatrical Intimacy Education, which is creating a consent-based environment, establishing boundaries, creating a deloaded or desexualized process, and then choreographing it, and then documenting it. how that applies to like the world of like institutions, because right now I'm the resident intimacy consultant at Steppenwolf and helping them to create policies. It is thinking about who is setting the culture, like where is the power, like who is the person that establishes the expectations, where does agency come into the practice for the people who are being asked to meet these expectations ultimately? How are we creating an environment that isn't causing harm, that isn't creating hostile work environments for those individuals to navigate? And then choreographing it like, how do we just go about doing our jobs? What is the physical action of the do? And then ultimately documenting it is like, how do we put things into policy to make sure that we're all in the same place of understanding of how we want to move forward? And more importantly, how do we make sure that this thing is repeatable?
Yeah, that's so much brilliance. Thank you for calling in quite a few names there of folks who are currently with us and practicing. And thank you also for calling in ancestors, people who inspire and help us understand the sort of reflexive nurturing that happens in intimacy. You know, you nurture yourself, and through nurturing yourself, you nurture your scene partners, your directors, right? It's all about just sort of creating that circle. And I really love that. Thank you. So talk to me about this next one. What are some of the challenges and the triumphs within your experience in intimacy work?
Ooh, I'll talk about the challenges first,
Right,
because that's a,
right.
um, uh, the challenges are um, getting people on board to understand what this is. Something that I've been saying is I feel like my one of my fears for this industry overall, or this practice, I would say, um, is that it's going to go the route of yoga. And I know that may be a weird way to say this, but I promise I'm going somewhere.
No,
It
that makes
is
perfect sense. Yeah.
yes, this idea of folks are focused on the aesthetic, on the shiny, on the like, what does this look like, as opposed to what this can be, which is a holistic wellness practice. Like intimacy for me is not just the moments that make it on stage to be witnessed by folks, but all the things that are happening that aren't witnessed, that aren't seen. Because even though our brains understand that we are just up there, we are just playing, our bodies are still going through those motions and we're still carrying those experiences in our bodies, you know, like the body keeps the score, body keeps the count. And so it is this understanding of the reason that that folks need to buy into this practice, that we need to understand what this is fully doing and how this is creating sustainability for those whose identities have been marginalized, who have been put and pushed to the fringes of the space. So I'm talking about those of the global majority. I'm talking about those of the LGBTQ plus community. I'm talking about individuals, those with differently abled individuals, like talking about those who don't always get consideration beyond the job, beyond the like you are in the room and you are contributing in a way, like your value being connected to your productivity, what you can create as far as capital goes. And so that seems to be the challenge right now of understanding this is a culture shifting tool. And ultimately, how do we make sure that we are creating advocacy and giving tools to everybody in the space so they can navigate in the same way, not trying to create this idea of a flat hierarchy of like we are all empowered in the same way. Um, but it is an understanding and using Alicia Garza's definition of power and empowerment from her book Purpose of Power. It is the understanding that what is power, which is the ability to influence or change your circumstances or the circumstances of others, versus empowerment, which is finding yourself being comfortable in the circumstances you find yourself in. And it is not a matter for me of like, I mean, although, yeah, get rid of all hierarchy and power, but understanding that we have to navigate in these systems, it is a matter of how do we make sure that we are empowering individuals, that they are confident in the situations and the circumstances that they find themselves in and understand the expectations. So they aren't being met with disappointment when they were never clear about what the expectation was in the first place. So to me, it is that challenge. And this not being looked at as a trend or a fad or just like, this is what they're doing because folks are sensitive. It's like people are trying to live beyond the processes and productions that they're working on, point blank, period. Um, so that's the challenge, is getting folks to understand that. The joys is watching how immediately it works for those who are utilizing those tools. And some of the best work that I've seen specifically has been like with my students, like just like watching them become ignited from the fact that like I have agency, I can advocate for my spouse, especially talking about young folks who until the age of 18 don't feel like they truly have agency to and voice to talk about that which affects them every day. They are told that they cannot join the conversation until they're 18, until they're an adult and they can make those decisions, despite being the individuals who are harmed because they are the most harmed first because they tend to be the most vulnerable population. And so it is really lovely, like watching my students, say no to things. Because to me, how I frame no is like saying no to somebody, to a request that somebody has of you, is saying no to the request, not to them fully. And saying no to somebody is just simply saying yes to yourself. That's all it is that you're doing. Um, and so I mean, I ultimately kind of in between the challenge and the joy, I would ultimately love to see more people who look like me doing this work. This is a field that is dominated specifically by like white women or white women and uh, femme presenting non-binary individuals. I want to make be clear on that. But I would just really love to see more individuals who look like me joining in on the conversation. But I understand the challenge because very much when I was doing like very much like how when I was doing my sexual assault prevention education work, I think it may be challenging for people to join the conversation if they feel that they are, the antagonists in the story. They are literally like the face of the problem. Like I still, and I mean, a little sad to say, and I'll end on this for right now, is like I still find um, it's still surprising to me that sometimes I walk into the space and folks are just like, oh, you're the intimacy person. Um, but I think it is because historically speaking, especially in this country, I am not I am not the face of safety. I am not what safety looks like. And I think many people think of intimacy as the creation of safety in the room. Where it is that is a byproduct, but it's ultimately how do I give you tools to navigate discomfort so you can do your work, so you can find what your yes is, even if it's not a joyous yes in the story that is being told.
Yeah, I think there's just so much in that in your response. I'm specifically want to pull out something you said, where you said saying no to someone or saying no to a request is sometimes simply saying yes to yourself. And I think that's a really, I think, critical takeaway about how critical these boundaries are, right? The boundaries are not just like your shirt says, right? Personal boundaries and joy. Boundaries are not a bad thing. Boundaries are here to help us all set, universal expectations on what we just can and cannot accomplish. And it's okay to not be able to accomplish everything, but it's not okay to say that you can and then have to deal with the fallout when it's like, hey, I wasn't ready for that, or you weren't ready for that. So thank you. That's such an incredible answer. I'm going to move on to another question. And I love
Yes.
that you brought in your teaching praxis here, thinking about being a teaching artist with students, particularly with emerging artists, right? So the field of intimacy as a recognized thing, right? The industry, as you said, while that may be fairly new, intimacy practices and ethics have appeared throughout history in individuals' lives, in theatrical praxis, thinking in particular about like applied theater and community engaged theater, right? We think about ways to draw boundaries for participants and things like that. So let me ask you this. If you're working with students, if you're working with emerging artists, so folks who may be new to theater artistry or theatrical intimacy, what advice do you have for those who are just looking to get their start in this field?
Hmm. I would say three things. One, understand and ask yourself the question, why do you want to do this work? Um, I often hear specifically from younger folks is just like, I just want to make sure that I'm creating the rooms. I'm making sure that no one had to go through the experiences that I had to go through. Um, and to me, that's an impossible ask because it isn't a matter of I cannot guarantee safety because that is subjective. What is safe for me is not necessarily safe for you. Um, and it is also it puts a burden on you to like have to be in the room. if you are essentially saying like, I am in the room and now consent is present, what that also means is once you leave, that consent leaves with you. And so making sure that you're aware of why you're doing this, because to me, the goal is to make sure that I'm creating sustainability that isn't necessary, that doesn't necessitate me being present in order to for it to be activated. I don't, if I am needed in order for this thing to work in the space, then I've just created a new line of dependency on me. I haven't actually given you any kind of freedom or ability to move and navigate and give yourself what you need. You are now dependent on me. So that's one. Understand why you're coming into this work. Two, awareness of your privileges. I am somebody who, yes, I am a Black individual, but I am a Black educated male individual. So there are some privileges in my intersecting identity there that I must be aware of, especially when we're talking about making space for other people. And so, how do I make sure to not centralize myself or try to speak on behalf of, as opposed to making space so folks can advocate and ask for what it is that they need, especially for those who are being tasked with having to repeat whatever the story is, sometimes like 8 times a week. And so having self-awareness of like, how do you affect the space? How does your and how are you making sure that you are not prioritizing your ego when this is essentially at the end of the day, this is selfless work. This is supposed to be. Um, and yes, it can be draining and can be tiring, but I think where like the energy is replenished is you give folks these tools and then they go and about their work and they work. And it's like, that's lovely. You can continue doing this. And now I can move on to like the 1,100 other projects that I said yes to. And then the final thing that I would say, and this is a question that I specifically ask my students that are doing intimacy, and I'm starting to just ask folks this just in general. And you can replace the word intimacy with like sustainability practices, consent-based trauma-informed practices, wellness. Like you can replace the word intimacy in this sentence with those. The question is, where are you practicing intimacy before you come into the room? Because if your job is to help to create and establish lines of communication to create sustainable work through relationships, through advocating for self, through establishing boundaries to understand and set expectations, where are you practicing that in your everyday relationships? How are you being consensual with people that you just met? How are you making sure that you're being trauma informed and not like dumping on like people that you know? Are you are you asking your friend, do you have the bandwidth to listen to this story before? Or are you just going in and doing like what are the things and the practices that you're engaging in? Because those are the things that make it inside the room. And I think something that tends to get lost is this idea that I walk into the room and all the answers will come to me. It's like this is a practice that is best that is best exemplified through modeling. It's like I love working in tandem with folks because I just get to model like the consensual type of relationships that I'm hoping that everybody else can see and then therefore emulate. And so it is that question of like, where are you practicing this? Like, I am Black outside of the room, I'm Black inside of the room. That is why I understand, I have a very clear understanding of what that is once I'm in the space. So that tends to be the primary question for me is like, where are you practicing these so they show up in the room when you show up in the room?
I love that response. And it really reminds me of our famous Augusto Boal quote where he says, theater itself is not the revolution. It is it's rehearsal for the revolution. And I feel that, what you've just said is intimacy training alone in theater is not going to change the entire world that we are trying to affect. But finding ways to emulate and sharpen your tools outside of theater training, that's really the key for demonstrating that consent informed or intimacy informed or whatever word you want to put into it. This is the rehearsal for the revolution. I think that's so beautiful, and I think again that just shows the power of theater to exist beyond the confines of a classroom, of a rehearsal studio, of a proscenium. We really can take this with us and be better inside and outside rehearsal spaces. So thank you so much for that response. I just have one final question, and I really do just want to listen to you talk for like hours and hours. So thank you. You know, in our field of theater, we spend a lot of time thinking about and speaking to emerging artists like we just did. And while I think that's of course critical, we always want to, feed the next generation. It's also really important for us established or experienced artists to pause, take stock, reflect on what we have accomplished, what we'd like to accomplish. So let me ask you this. What advice do you have for experienced or established intimacy artists? And how can we experienced and established folks be better advocates for each other or for our emerging artists?
Mm. For those who are established, I would say you are setting the standards. You are creating the understanding, being that this is a new field, and folks are just really getting to a place of being in engaged dialogue with what this is. There are things, I mean, I'm going to talk about capitalism a little bit, but it's important. We tell people what our value is. And if we don't know it, then they will try to tell us. And so for me, it is a matter of this was a small thing that happened, but so significant. The first project that I worked on was with Chelsea Pace, and she made sure that the theater contracted me separately for two specific reasons that she told me. One, to ensure that if they wanted to continue working with me in the future, they would be able to just contact me directly. They wouldn't have to go through her in order to get through me. So not gatekeeping the work. Two, to establish that I also am getting compensated for this work. Um, because it is a matter of there's a big conversation happening specifically around qualification versus certification. And I have very specific feelings around certification, not because I don't believe that we should have standards across the board, but because we then determine who is the person who are the individuals that are able to advance in this work, by who can afford to shadow somebody for free, who can afford to pay for that certification. Um, Especially, and it's the irony of this, like we're trying to work with those who have been marginalized, therefore disenfranchised, and therefore not financially supported in the same way historically, but we are making or creating a system in which in order for you to be part of, you have to be able to literally financially buy into. So it's just like, so those are the challenges.
And also
And so,
certification is not standardized across the board, right? Certification in one organization is completely different from certification in others. So even that is sort of a false gate that exists.
yes, and so it is a challenge. And to be clear, I mean, I was literally just on a panel um, with the CEO of Intimacy Directors and Coordinators, Dr. Jessica Steinrock. And so it's not a matter of like we need to be in conflict or we need to be arguing or anything of that nature. It is for me a matter of understanding where I am seeing opportunities to start opening doors and windows and not just taking folks that you know by the hand and bringing them in with you. Because for me, we need everybody. We need everybody. Um, and like my background is in sexual assault prevention education. The other black men or black non-binary individuals that I've met doing this work have a myriad of backgrounds in trauma-informed care. Some of them have dance backgrounds. Some of them come from sex work. So it is not a matter of there is only one way to come into this work, and only one way to have this conversation. And so I would say for the experts, it's like you set the price points. So undercutting, being saying that, okay, I can work for this amount of money. Unfortunately, what that does is it sets the expectation for this person who is new to this of like, all right, the next person also has to work for that amount of money, but they may not be able to. I can't afford to work for free. I genuinely cannot. I'm not in that position. So being mindful about what are the precedents that you are setting and expectations that you are setting. Um, I'm somebody who's very specific about my time. I only do about 5 or 6 visits if I'm working on a production. The reason that I do that, because like, don't get me wrong, I don't have to be in the room every single day, all day, but I don't want to set that expectation that the next intimacy professional then has to be there for every rehearsal when they're only getting paid $1,000 to work on a show for 2 months. Like that's really, really hard to do. And so just being very clear about the expectations that you are setting, being that we are literally the trendsetters of this, especially if it is the first time in which we are being introduced to an institution. What is our process? How do we work? Being very, very clear about those things so we are setting the next person up for success, um, and can continue expanding this conversation.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for that response. That's actually the end of my questions for today. So I just wanted to leave a little bit of space here. If you have any parting words that you really want to enter into the conversation, or if you want to de-roll a little bit from expert, you can tell me something fun about yourself, something you love about where you live, or just a little bit of a freestyle moment.
Yes. I will end with that offering. I
Yes.
want to say one thing as far as contributing to the conversation. And folks who have been in conversations with me are probably just like, Greg, because I love quotes and everything of that nature. So one of my favorite quotes is by Prentice Hemphill. They are the oh my God, the Embodiment Institution. Every time I bring up Prentice's name, like what they do, like escapes my brain, and I
I
quote
just
them
follow
all.
them on Instagram. So I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
I'm
like
keeping up with you.
yeah, no, but no, literally that podcast, Finding Our Way, like illuminated my intimacy work to like the nth degree. Because like somatics, thinking about the body, like what happens to the body itself. So my favorite quote from Prentice that I use all the time is boundaries are the distance in which I can love you and me simultaneously. And to me, that is the epitome and ultimately what it is that we're trying to create. It is, I want to show up to the work, but often I have been told to leave everything at the door. And then the first thing that I'm being asked to is mine from my experiences. So I'm constantly being asked to work from a deficit that is created by how I'm being asked to enter into the room, not as my full self. And so what I would what I would say is working from the proactive is ultimately, I think, the thing that's going to save us. Because when we're working from the proactive and not the reactive, we give ourselves a lot more options. If we are planning, if we understand that if we are working like stage managers, I love stage managers. If we are working like stage managers and giving ourselves and preparing ourselves a kit to meet the challenges of what we know is potentially going to be there, I think we're better setting ourselves up for success. Because ultimately, and this is how I'll end this part is um, ultimately a lot of people didn't come back when the industry reopened. Um, and this is also the same time that I started doing this work and starting really noticing that. And I think it is because, and there's a quote that I use often is, you cannot ask people to find their joy in the same place that they lost it. And so there's just I think a lot of folks didn't come back because they still don't trust these institutions are doing what it is that they can as far as providing resources to create sustainability. And too often where they only thought of or considered when they were able to produce something that was moving towards the product. And what was getting left behind was the people in the process. And so I would say, how do we make sure that we are creating the spaces so then we can make sure that we know the differences between all are welcome here versus we have built this space with you in mind. So that is what I would love to like offer. And then
Yeah.
I'll end on something a little bit gentler, but I saw that. Do you have anything that you wanted to? to say,
No,
like
that's so beautiful. I was just going to ask, what you talked about finding our joy, like if you want to share how you find your joy or.
um, right now it's been sleep.
Yeah. Rest is revolution,
Yes,
right?
rest is revolution.
Mhm.
Um, it is rest has been the big thing. Like I'm on a right now, and this is not to sound any, but I'm on a 5 states in 10 days jaunt right now, and I'm just like, where, what, when, how. Um, and so that which is bringing me joy is the idea of a break, of stepping away and understanding that the rest is just as important, if not more important than the work. And so I'm trying to figure out what a vacation is for me. The first 2 weeks of June, my birthday is on the 15th. I'm just gonna just
Wow, a
step away for a bit.
Gemini, huh?
Mhm.
Oh,
Gemini
that's
double
I
Virgo.
love Geminis. I love my
Gemini
best
double Virgo
friend.
though. That double Virgo keeps me
Wow.
grounded.
In
Yeah,
line. That's
in
beautiful. I
line.
love that.
Yes. So yeah, so that's what's bringing me joy. The idea of rest and what that looks like, being able to reconnect. I think something that gets lost when, you post about all the things that you're working on and everyone's like happy for you and everything. Or you assume everyone's happy for you. Um, it is a matter of I miss, you know, I miss talking to my nephew, like being able to check in, because I've sent him some books, and I'm just like I want to talk to him about the books that I'm sending him. Like I miss, just conversations, 3 hour conversations about like nothing with my sister, like checking in on my niece, conversing with my best friend Jeff about just like all like what is happening with his family and like the journey that he's in like right now in Taekwondo. Like you miss like the little life moments. And so I'm really excited, and what's bringing me joy is the possibility of reconnecting, of just like really reconnecting. I think the panini and being behind screens really kind of illuminated like we need to be in community, we need to be in space with each other, and yeah, I always say I love people. I don't always like them, but I love people, and I'm really looking forward to reconnecting with the people that I love.
That's beautiful.